Hey, all you ethic cuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. We are about to dive in. Drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat. Like we say every single week here, your network is your net worth. Neither are big enough. We have a very collegial, very special industry that we're all a part of, and it's your job to solve the problems in your world. The best way for you to do that is to expand that network. I guarantee you that there's somebody on here today who has just solved the problem that you might be dealing with, and it's up to you to reach out and take advantage of this unique thing that we're all a part of. A couple of quick updates. Man, we just got back from HCCA. It was so cool, so phenomenal to get around so many people who are like-minded and doing, fighting the same battles and trying to make their workplaces better. It was so encouraging to be around folks, learn so much. We had a lot of fun. So happy to give a little update on that. Today, we're going to be talking about thinking like a compliance executive. How do we dial in our third-party risk tolerance? We got the one and only here, the man, the myth, the legend, John Hughes. How's it going, John? Let's give John an Ethicsverse, warm Ethicsverse welcome. How's it going, John?
I'm doing great, Nick. Thanks for having me on. I'm regularly on the other side of this, so I'm thrilled to be here on this side. So,
well, I'm glad you're here, man. We got a really fun conversation today, and you're somebody who's really done a nice job in navigating through your organization and really kind of exhibiting that compliance executive mentality. So a couple of quick announcements here. So here is our link tree. I encourage you to follow us everywhere everywhere that's possible. So our LinkedIn channel, our Ethico LinkedIn channel always has the best clips from our podcast, award-winning podcast, The Ethics Experts, and from our special place every Thursday, The Ethicsverse. So follow us there. Go ahead and also, here's our book giveaway for today. So we are still going to keep pushing. Anytime you get selected for a free book from the world famous Ethico book giveaway, you can pick any book from the Ethico library. Our good friend from last week, Lisa Beth Lantini Walker and Steph Tashada, wrote this phenomenal book about raising your game, not your voice. It works really well with this conversation that we're going to be having today because it's all about persuasion and really kind of dialing in our messaging to ultimately get the approval and get the buy-in necessary to drive that impact. So, we love you. We don't even like making money around here. We just like giving away free books. So we're going to be giving away 5 of these babies today. And, when we were at the conference, a lot of folks were coming up to our booth and saying, oh, I love Ethico. What do you guys do? So I apparently have done a bad job of explaining what it is we do. So we have an enterprise-wide ethics and compliance, people-based ethics and compliance platform that helps you to really crowdsource risk intelligence at scale, provide those insights back at the point of risk, engage more folks in your ethics and compliance program, and really show your value a lot more. So that goes from issue intake and case management, investigation management, corrective action plans, incident management, disclosure administration, right? Your annual disclosures, exit interviews, screening and monitoring, and training. So those are the main buckets of things we do. We offer a year for free because, like I said, we don't even care about money around here. Year for free can really help you de-risk. If you're interested, or if in the next 18 months you're thinking about perhaps looking out in the market, it might be worth taking a look at what's out there and seeing what a next-gen tool that allows you to put more of your unique gifts to work in pursuit of your objectives, what that can do for your bottom line and for your program. So look at all these awards. Love my Ethico team here and all of these awards. Love bragging about them. Okay, here's the book spotlights. A bunch of great books that are out there. We gave away, over the last month, I think we gave away about 500 or 600 books. So bunch of great ones out there. I want to share this thing. I maybe mentioned it last week, but you see these little children's books that Tom Fox put out? These were going like hotcakes at our booth. And what people are starting to do with these, this is so genius. They're giving them to their general counsels. They're giving them to the board and to leadership. Particularly this one about being a compliance officer is awesome because this guy has done this and he's gotten such great feedback from folks where they say, oh, I see what you guys do now. This is coming from a lawyer, right? This is coming from a chief legal officer. His light bulb was turned on because he thought compliance was legal. They're obviously very distinct and different functions. So again, get creative out there. A bunch of great resources. Hope your bookshelf is full of these things. The Great Women in Compliance podcast. I just got to keep pushing it. I just got invited on. So a round of applause for me. I can't wait to go on with Hema and Lisa Fine. But check that out. And also check out the Two Gurus Talk Compliance. That's my other newest podcast. So here's me, Cyberpunk Nick. You guys know me. How's it going? The one and only John Hughes. Me and John, we are living in 2099, and we are going to solve all of your problems. John is a JD. He is the Regional Ethics and Compliance Manager for Dragados US. And in that role, John has worked with a bunch of different companies throughout the United States to partner with leadership to bring forward a strong ethical and compliant program. John is somebody who I've learned a lot from, and he really kind of embodies this next generation, this compliance 3.0. You know, he's not a compliance officer. He really kind of exhibits that compliance executive mentality. And you're going to hear today how, you know, this really cool story about how he navigated through the third-party risk management process, how he got the buy-in he needed, how he worked with his counterparts with his consulting firm, and ultimately got a lot of people to buy in on an operational basis. So with that, how's it going, John? What's happening, buddy?
I'm doing great, Nick. I love the picture, though. I need that framed.
You've never looked better, John.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's me, and next year I'm going to do that.
That's the new you.
Yes, that's the new me.
So let's kind of dive in a little bit, John. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your compliance journey, just to give folks the context of your role, the shape of your role, and then we can get into this kind of third-party journey that you've been on for the last little while here.
Sure. So I've been in compliance and ethics now almost 19 years, or 18 years, I guess it's been. So I came out of law school. I had two options really presented to me. One was with the New Jersey State Ethics Commission. The other one was to go to the Attorney General's office. I don't want to sound like I knew ethics was my future going in. It was, at that time, I had kind of focused in law school on white collar and looking at that side of the criminal conduct area. And I thought, well, white collar crime and business crime was an area I wanted to get into. And this ethics commission role looked like it was something that would line up with that. So I went there, and first thing I learned was, yeah, it's not a legal role, as you just said, Nick, right? Ethics and compliance is its own animal. You can't come at it from a strictly legal framework. So I got in there. I had a great mentor. Spent 9 years at the New Jersey State Ethics Commission, first as a legal specialist, which is really just a generalist for the ethics field, doing investigations, giving advice, that kind of stuff. And then I ended up as the state's compliance officer. And that's where it really got into more of the program building and designing and helping state agencies figure out their compliance. And I did that for 3 years before I went over into higher ed with our largest state university in New Jersey, Rutgers University. Was there for 3.5 years. Tried my hand at consulting a little bit. Maybe I don't have the same drive level that a Gallo brother does, because you guys make it look easy, and I struggled with building it like you do. So. That didn't work out as well for me, and I ended up going to Dragados USA, which is a large civil engineering firm. We build bridges, airports, tunnels, all that kind of fun stuff. And we're global, part of a global conglomerate. And really, when I came in, I actually started as the regional compliance manager, meaning that I handled our 5 affiliated companies, which were US-based companies that we had acquired. And actually now I am, and have been for a little bit, the corporate compliance and ethics director. So I have oversight over not just our US affiliated companies, but also our larger US operations as a whole. So that's kind of how I got where I'm at now. During that path, I've had a lot of building programs, developing specialized training, a lot of investigations work, but where my focus really is, when I came into this field, I think I had a reactive mindset. And as I've developed in this, especially with program building, I've really learned that the proactive side is really where the focus needs to be. And that's getting the buy-in and building the program out that works operationally. And I always keep an operational focus when I'm trying to do new policy, programs, and really figure out how this can be streamlined down to the most effective way to get the best buy-in from our people on the ground that are going to have to live with this policy, this procedure, and really put, the rubber to the road, so to speak, So that's kind of where I got to here. And that's kind of my background in a nutshell. So.
Yeah, that's a great background. Something you just said, I think is so important. It's like you can come up with the best recipe, but like somebody has to cook that if someone's going to end up enjoying it. And you can come up with the best compliance plan or the best, protocol or, policy. But if people don't buy into it, to your point, it's never going to get off the ground. It's going to be a failure to launch situation. And that ultimately is going to splash back on you at some point. You know what I'm saying? Like it's on you to get to generate this outcome, irrespective of the challenges along the way. And I think pulling that operational focus in sooner can allow us to adopt that like proactive influence in a more a more effective way. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And that's what the DOJ is looking at, right? They want to see effectiveness. We're no longer where we were, 15, 16 years ago, where it's, you have the 7 elements. And if you can show like a checkbox, right, that you have the 7 elements, okay, you have a compliance program. No, they want to see us now, and they've evolved, and they want to see the effectiveness. What are we doing to make sure that not only do we have training, that it's effective, not only do we have a hotline, are people using it? And that's where we're at now, and that's where I see us continuing to grow. And as ethics professionals and compliance professionals, we need to adapt as we go.
Right. And for us to adapt as we go, we need to understand the lay of the land. We need to understand the nuances of our business and the risk tolerance dynamics and so forth. So I'd love to kind of at a high level talk through kind of understanding risk tolerance and like how do we operationalize that, and how do we build kind of risk confidence. And then maybe we can transition into this case study of what you just went through, where you put all of these kind of principles into play. So when we're thinking about like understanding risk tolerance, what does that mean? And how do you uncover that? Because risk tolerance is like everything else. I mean, it's subjective. It's inside your mind. It's hard to even articulate because it's kind of situational. And we have to kind of interpret that if we're going to be an appropriate representation, for the organization. And if we're going to successfully navigate them through, the risk path that's going to be most appropriate for the business, the leadership, the industry, all that other kind of stuff.
Yeah. So, I think any conversation about risk tolerance really starts with your risk assessment. Everybody should be doing a risk assessment at some point, whether you're doing it in-house or whether you're bringing in an outside firm to help you with it. You really got to get to that risk assessment first. You got to identify where your key risks are in your specific company.
Right.
Compliance is not an off-the-shelf situation. We can't just take, here's compliance from, this bank. Let's just put it into this industry. It doesn't work like that. So everybody's risk focus is different based off of their industry. Maybe you're importing and you have to worry about supply chain as a risk way more than, know your client that the banks are worrying about. So really getting to a risk assessment, working either yourself on it or with someone else to really help you understand from the business perspective where your executives are seeing the risk. And that's really important, that when you do a risk assessment, it's not the compliance officer and this consultant sitting around doing a risk assessment. It's, you are a conduit to your executive team, to your operations team, to your, middle managers, to get their input into this so that it's designed properly. And I think that's where it starts. And then, there's a lot of different formulas. My experience, the big four all pretty much use the same formula. They all have the same chart, right? I think they just copy and paste and change their logos. But that's fine as a base point to start with. And then you got to really, once you figure out where your key risk areas are, that's when you can get to the where in our industry, is this an inherent risk or is this a company specific risk? And that's where you start getting those specific design elements in to identify where your tolerance can be. Because if something is inherent risk in your industry, everybody is dealing with that same level. So you're not going to be able to mitigate it away.
Right.
You're not going to get rid of it. It's part of doing business in this industry, and that's where you need to have those tough conversations sometimes, right? You have somebody on your board who's like, "Oh, we got, this risk is too high." Well, that's where we make our profit. So that's
right. Yeah, right. Exactly.
If you have no risk appetite, you have no profit margin.
That's right.
That's where your profits are really coming in. So you've got to figure out where that is industry specific, or are we as a company exposing ourselves to a risk here that we can mitigate, that we can close to just be in line more. And at the same time, always keeping, because this is a business, I'm private sector now, right? So I always have to keep in mind that we're running a business.
Right.
We need to make a profit, because if we don't make a profit, none of us are going to have jobs. And I can't, design a program that's going to put us all out of work.
I mean, the name of the game is clarity,
program.
right?
Right.
Yeah, that's right. So you can't design a program that's going to work if you don't have the clarity about how your business actually works, where is the money made, how does the industry actually work, what does that value chain look like, and where is the value created, and a clarity around leadership's, risk tolerance. To your point, I really think these 4-box models are extremely helpful in these scenarios. So if you think about the top, like a particular risk, it either is a risk or isn't a risk. Right. And then leadership thinks it's a risk or thinks it's not a risk. Well, there's 4 different outcomes there for any particular risk. You can be right or wrong about it being a risk, or leadership, you can be right or wrong of whether it is a risk or it isn't a risk. And leadership can be incorrect or incorrect about whether they think it's a risk or it's not a risk. Doing exercises like that, you can really start to see where does my risk in missing the risk or mispricing the risk, where is that going to live? And it's going to live in a scenario where leadership thinks it's not a risk and you think it is a risk. That's where the persuasion needs to happen. And that in that sort of bottom, I guess that would be the bottom left box. That's where you need to really dig in, I think, to understand where is the line in the sand? Is this a risk that we as an organization want to take, or that you, leader, are willing to take? Are you right about that? Or do you not understand that same, the full context of it, or what other fines have been out there and so forth? That's where the conversation needs to be. If everybody thinks it's a risk and leadership thinks it's a risk, well, that's going to be an easy one. And we're just going to try to mitigate that in the most sort of efficient/effective way possible. But there are 4 outcomes here. And I find that many times we kind of end up debating if it's a risk or not. And it's well, there's also another axis here. Is it a risk that they think is acceptable? That's what we have to kind of dial in on. And those have to move from both sides, because our risk tolerance might not necessarily be quote unquote right, and theirs might not be right.
Right. I think as compliance officers, we're also just naturally programmed to try and mitigate risk, right? So we're going to identify a risk and we're going to try and move it over here. But that's where those tough conversations, like you're saying, right? You have that conversation with the executive team, you explain and educate that this is a risk, this is what the risk could be, and then hear from them that this is a risk that is built in, that we're going to work with, that we understand is there, but this is something. So they're naturally going to be on the side of take more risk. We're naturally going to be, as compliance officers, less risk. So it's always finding that happy medium and figuring out how, we can mitigate this some, but still allow you to take the risk that we need to continue to make the profit margin and build the business. Right. So I think those tough conversations are really, they're the biggest challenge I think all of us are facing, is having that conversation and getting the buy-in from those executives. Because the worst thing that we can be viewed as is a blockade to business. If we're viewed as the Department of No and the business killers, we're never going to get the buy-in.
There was an article, I think, in the Financial Times recently about an organization that really just evaporated its risk management team away because the whole organization was complaining about how they were stopping progress and so forth. So that's a bad omen, and that's a cautionary tale for us to make sure that we're not showing up that way, or we may or may not be showing up that way, and then we may or may not have that perception. So there's 2 things that we have to kind of battle and attack. What you're really kind of talking about is operationalizing risk management, and talk to me a little bit about how you have been in those quote unquote tough conversations and help to navigate this balance between like an acceptable risk level and potential consequences that are perhaps tail events.
Yeah, I think this is a great spot to jump into, like the story of the third party risk, right? So what we went through was we decided as an organization that we were going to go through the ISO 37301 certification and the 37001 certifications. In those, it has a component that we needed to have on third-party risk due diligence. And we were doing due diligence, but only in a financial perspective. We weren't really looking at the compliance and the ethics side of it. So we needed to integrate something. We used some consultants. They came in, they gave us their great ideas. And what I found is, those consultants, and we looked at some software, and we ended up using Navex Risk Rate for a while. And what we found is, to the point we were just having, right, as the compliant, they were mitigating too far. They were saying, you need to do this. And if we do that, we had two problems. One, operations wouldn't do it. They couldn't make that work within our business model. They couldn't cut out all risk, which is what essentially they were advocating for from the consultant side. It was great. They were taking, best practices of other industries, but not tailoring it to our industry risk areas.
Right.
And those solutions that they were offering, those policies, the software solution from Navex, they were all overkill for our industry. And so, we had this feedback from our operations team that, we can't make this work. It's delaying time, in bid response, we have all these issues with this. It's just taking up too much of our time and cost. So that was when I really had to reevaluate what we were doing and break down, okay, what are our key areas here in third-party due diligence? What do we...
Can I pause you real quick?
Yeah,
what tipped you off to like stiff arm that, right? Because you're using some kind of a tool. This tool is giving you back some answers, and at some point you didn't see those answers, and then at some point you were like, we're not doing this. So walk me through that. You're starting to read it and you're like, this is crazy, or what? And like, where did you get the confidence to question what the expert was saying,
Yeah, so what we started getting was a lot of what the system was generating as yellow flags for a lot of our business partners. Like, it was getting to the point where using this criteria was creating yellow flags for like 50% of our third parties. And when we would dig in, and of course that becomes very time consuming, we have our operations team that doesn't understand what a yellow flag means. We're digging in and we're finding things like we had a vendor somewhere in the country, I don't remember what state, but their business initials were KCA. Well, this system flagged Kia Motors as a possible connection. And then, so how can I justify, and how can I go back to our operations team and say to them, this system is useful to us when you're getting a yellow flag, making you have to stop, pause, and wait for compliance to jump in when it's something so absurd like that. Right. And we were doing, reputation risk screening, and we found that we were getting, our outside counsel in certain areas were getting flagged because they were working on a case that made it into the papers. So we were getting adverse media alerts when they're representing somebody in a case. And it just became so overwhelmingly convoluted and difficult. And we worked, and this is where it really broke down for us. We tried working with them and trying to refine and tailor this more to our needs. And after 9 months, we realized we can't keep going this way. Operations cannot use this. They'll never use it. We need to cut bait, and we need to figure out what the right solution is. And that's where we got to the point where we started talking about having these conversations. What are the key components that we need to know about our third parties. What are the things that if it comes up, we're saying stop right now, end the conversation. We cannot do business with this company. And then once we got to there, that's when we really knew what our risk tolerance was. This is an absolute no. Everything else, if there's something that's a little questionable, then we need to find different mitigation techniques, but we're not going to stop work there. And that's where, that kind of identified what our key components were. And, this isn't a commercial for Ethico, but we came to sanction check that you offer as a solution. And it wasn't an exact fit, but your team worked with us to make it more of a fit for us.
Right.
So, and that's, what I needed. I needed a partner that could help me get to the key components. And in this case, because we're large government contractors, we need to know, is somebody sanctioned, debarred? Are we not able to do business with them from a government standpoint? Will we not get paid for their work? And that's where we said, okay, this is here. And, we still have other teams that are doing the financial risk, evaluating whether they can get the proper finances in place and that stuff. But that's not from the compliance standpoint. That's from a financial standpoint, whether they're a good business partner. That's way before compliance is jumping in.
That's determined by looking at their balance sheet and their financials, not whether they're like a good business or like a bad actor or whatever,
Right. So what we did was, we went to that. We went to sanction check, and we also updated and refined our third-party vendor paperwork that they had to disclose to us. And we really focused in on the key areas for me, right? I need to know, are you under investigation?
Right.
Have you or any of your top executives been convicted of a business crime? Or are you potentially going through the process, an appeal process right now on debarment and sanction? That's what I want to know. I want to know, is this area a risk for us? Are you really going to end up in a problem area? And so that's kind of where we refined our process. And then I was able to sell that to the executives because, from their perspective, this is where they want the risk tolerance to be. Okay, then that's what we're going to do. This is our solution. I can make it more practical for our operations team, but then I had to get the buy-in from, the next level. And that's
let's get into that. I want to talk I do want to talk about, like you just said, I had to sell them. So that's a whole conversation that I do not want to pass over. Okay. I also, before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about your experience with your external consultants, because that was kind of a similar thing of this off the shelf thing. Boom, go ahead and do this. And you, with your common sense and your, golden brain, you said, well, that's not actually going to work given what I know about this business. So let's talk about that piece, and then we can talk about kind of how you showed up with leadership to sell them on that.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I mean, what I found from the consultants, and I'm sure many of you have had similar conversations, is that the consultants were bringing up every possible risk area that they could think of. Every guidance or advice from the DOJ, they're bringing it up to us as a real risk. And for us, some of these are shadow risks because, like I said earlier, they're inherent risk in our industry. We have a transient labor force because we're moving from project to project around the country. We don't have the ability to do certain long-standing employment procedures because we're constantly hiring and moving from project to project. So there were things that they were recommending that we just didn't have the ability to implement or weren't really a risk for us. We work in areas where we have project labor agreements, so we just work with unions to staff us at different projects. Well, we don't have ownership of those employees. We can't implement some of these ideas that that you're putting out there. And so to me, those became, and I think I've talked to you about this before, shadow risks, right? They're risks, but they're not risks to our industry or not risks to our company because of the way we operate and do our business. And being able to distinguish that was really, you know, I think it's the key component, right? Because
I think you're right.
Consultants are just going to keep selling you.
Well, yeah,
Their
and they're
business
accountants,
model, right?
and they're freaking accountants. You know what I'm saying? So they're just
A
going
lot
to
of
keep
times,
saying, I'm an accountant, so I can say that. Okay.
Yeah. But right, I mean, they're
going to
not
keep selling you.
complying.
They're going to keep bringing up risks, and they're going to wait for the pushback from you because they have, I don't want to call it a perverse incentive, but they have their own incentive to continue to sell things and fix things and get entrenched more. That's just kind of the natural dynamic that you have to navigate through. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. There's always another solution that they're going to offer, right?
Totally.
They're going to identify a problem and then, hey, we have a solution that can work on that. Well, you don't need a consultant for a lot of these solutions. And you know, but that's their business model. And, you know, that's great for them. But as a compliance professional, we need to be able to have that conversation and convince our executive team, who's used to using consultants, who brings in consultants for business decisions, that those consultants are not necessarily understanding our industry or our risk profile.
Correct.
And
Cindy just said that consultants sometimes don't understand your business. They just went through their playbook. And if you're just outsourcing your thinking to some expert, that's a bet you're making. You know what I'm saying? Right. If you're like, cool, here, go do that whole thing, you're kind of implicitly assuming that they have all the context to make that right decision. And this is a great example, one of millions, where, you know, the consultant comes in without that context. You're just running a regular playbook and they don't understand that nuance. I think that's a really big deal.
Yeah. And I think, not to lose this point, you know, you brought up that most of them are accountants, but they've also never done operations. They don't know how to turn this idea, this concept, this protection, this whatever they're talking about into something that's actually operational in a lot of cases in any industry, let alone our specific industry. So they come in, they leave the great idea on the desk, and then here's the compliance professionals, like everybody on this call, going, okay, but how do we make that happen? That's not in their playbook. They don't know how to do that part.
Well, that's your job.
Tell you. Yeah.
My job is to make PowerPoints. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
So you made this distinction between kind of actual risks or, you know, inherent risks and shadow risks. Yeah. And let's kind of really hammer out this difference in the context of like a road trip. Okay. So what is a shadow risk on the road trip? Like getting a blowout.
Right. Well, I mean, if your tires are within, you know, 60,000 miles in,
past due,
what's the likelihood that you're going to just naturally have a blowout, right? So the risk level is lower. You have that risk anywhere you go that you can get a flat tire, but is it enhanced by the fact that I'm going on a road trip? No, it's just an inherent risk of driving a car. Right. Not having toll money is a real risk. That's something.
Or me behind the wheel perhaps might be a real risk, right? But to your point, there are things that are inherent to the business, right? Like if you're in oil and gas exploration, there's a natural environmental risk as long as you're pulling oil out of the ground. To your point, right?
Absolutely.
So I love that. I love that distinction. I think that's a very smart way to kind of start dividing up the world, because you got this kind of amorphous blob of risk and you're like, all right, well, what am I going to do with this? And then you got a voice in the ear of some consultant telling you, well, you got to fix them all. And then you got a CEO saying like, this is fine. None of this stuff has ever happened before. And you're in the middle trying to kind of sort it out.
Yes. And that's actually, we were getting to that point, that point you just made. You know, the operations team were pushing back so hard on these other the software that we were using and this risk profile that the consultants were recommending, that our CEO was getting to the point where, okay, we're ready to scrap this as a proactive, approach and just deal with it when it happens.
Right.
And as a compliance professional, like everybody on this call, I know that's the worst way we can be running our compliance program. I don't want to be putting out fires. I want to be preventing fires. So getting the opportunity and the trust from the executive team to be able to have that conversation and say, I understand. We need to find a solution that works for the team, not for the consultants. Give me some time. Let me find what'll work for us. And
so I want to pause there and let's dive into that conversation, because That's what I think that compliance executive mindset is. And that is such the antithesis of, a business that's shutting down its risk management function because it's clogging up the works, or the Office of No, or the anti-business department, or any of the other kind of derogatory monikers that kind of attach themselves to compliance. I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about mindset, how you got to that point. Maybe you've always been that kind of a way, but I really want to kind of deconstruct and analyze how you showing up that way, like, impacted your perception in the organization, and how that unlocked more power for you essentially down the road.
Yeah, that's hard to answer. Because I do think that I have an operational mind to do things, is from an operations mindset. I think I got a low battery warning. Give me 1 second.
You're good. If you die here, if this dies out, this thing is
good.
Crashing and burning. Okay.
No, I'm back in.
Charge it.
No, I'm good. We're all good. Plug back in.
Okay, good.
The cord got kicked out. No, so I mean, really, I've always kind of tried, maybe like a puzzle, like how to fit our goals into what we really need to be doing, and that's where I think that operational mindset and that conversation really comes from. So I don't know if it was trained on or learned on as much as it was, I think, always the way my mind worked. So identifying a problem and trying to find a solution that works is kind of how I guess I'm wired. So, but convincing others to do it, that's more of a learned thing, I think.
So talk to me about this. Were you the first compliance officer at your organization?
No, I had a predecessor, and there was just a slightly different mindset. It was more of a let's tackle everything mindset, and not as much of an
the boil the
operational
ocean
focus.
mindset. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about.
100%.
Did you notice pushback, or did at some level when you're stepping into someone's shoes, they still kind of smell like the other person's feet. You know what I mean? So when you first started to get into that role, did you feel some of that? Did you feel some kind of reticence, or did you feel there was like an inherent expectation on the other side that it would be a little bit more of the same? And if you sense that, how did you go about kind of unpacking that and showing up in a different way to break that pattern that had been established by your predecessor?
Yeah, there was definitely resistance.
Yeah,
it was definitely resistance to compliance, and honestly, it's conversations. You got to sit down with the people and try and change their mindset, and offer. And I tell my team this, that we're there to help them, to give them solutions, to be a partner.
That's right.
In this. Right. I know you're the chief servant officer, I think, for Ethico, right?
Yep.
Like you have that servant mentality, right? So we're a part of this business. We're not outside of this business.
Apart from it. Right.
Right. We're a partner here, and we're trying to make sure that the profit margin is solid as well, because we're making sure that you're not fined, that you're not, losing money because we get shut down for a week because of something. So we're trying to identify those, give you the tools to just keep operating the way you need to operate within maybe a slightly different framework, but we're not trying to stop what you're doing. We're trying to partner to take some of that risk away from you and share it with you. And that's kind of where we were trying to get to the conversations. And honestly, in some situations, it was really being able to demonstrate that value at some point. Something came up and we were able to step in and help them solve something. That's where we started changing some minds. And, you got to have results. Like in anything else in business, you got to have results. They got to see that what you put in place actually help them in some way, whatever that way is, right? Whether it's an investigation that helps them find where something went wrong, money lost, that kind of stuff, or whether it's getting their team to operate more efficiently. And I think that's how we started changing the mindset. And it wasn't overnight. There was no way it was overnight. And having the full support of leadership and having a strong commitment from leadership, that mindset was, John's here to help you.
Right.
And
that probably didn't take that long to change that mentality, right? Was it 6 years of you walking in this other person's shoes? No. I mean, I'm sure it took a little bit of time, but it probably took less time than I think people fear.
Yeah. And again, you got to be able to show results. So walking all of these, what I have basically 6 companies, independent companies, all with different presidents, walking them through the certification process we did with the ISO and making it as easy as possible on them and really making sure they understood what we were doing. That really gave them some results that they could understand what we're there for. So that really did help, I'll say, going through that certification process with them, because in a lot of these spots, well, the 5 acquired companies, they didn't have a framework in some areas. So we were building a framework, and while doing that, working towards certification. And, ISO certification is great. Obviously we have it, but I view it as DOJ light. So it's not to the DOJ standard. So it's just a little bit less, right? So in my conversations, not only was I saying, okay, we have this corporate goal to get you certified, but I'm here to also get you to the DOJ standard, because that's what's going to matter to you in the end. We need to move to this standard because that's what's going to protect you. When something goes wrong, we're going to be ready for that. If something, knock on wood, we haven't had anything go wrong, right? We haven't had the DOJ walk in,
right?
But I'm confident, and I may, help them get to that confidence themselves, that we have a program in place that if the DOJ walked in, they would view it as, at an effective standard. So that explaining to them that I'm here to protect them and the company, I think really started winning over some of those people.
Yeah, I mean, coming from that kind of helpful mentality that, hey, look, we're all wearing the same jersey. I'm on the same team as you. I'm trying to, we're all, invested in this business and we want this place to succeed. And I'm trying to help you move faster, is a much more, I think, persuasive and effective way to communicate that. When so you have these 6 different divisional presidents. I think you said 5 of them didn't have something in place. So you're really kind of implementing some stuff. Is something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So of the 5, 1 had a fully fleshed out program where they had somebody in place who understood compliance. The other 4 were at different levels. 3 of them had basically nothing.
Okay.
And 1 was, 3/4 of the way there, I would say. They had a framework. They just weren't implementing and operationalizing it. So, introducing some new stuff was really hard for the 3.
Yeah, right.
Just working to adapt with the 1 that already had a full program was easy, right? They already understood compliance. They had the buy-in. They knew what compliance did. So that one was my easy one. And then the one that was 3/4 of the way there, they kind of had the DOJ checkbox mentality, right? Well, we have all the elements. We're just not.
Boom. That's effective.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. So
it was. So you had these 3 kind of groups of folks. And I really nerd out on this because, I mean, we spend all this time at conferences talking about concepts and this is how you should do your risk assessment and this is how this process should work. But to your point, the car only goes if the rubber's on the road. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's only going to happen if people buy into it and actually do the process and do the things that they're supposed to do. And to get these 5 different groups to a bought-in destination took different efforts, right? You had some guys who were starting from scratch, some guys who kind of had a check-the-box mentality, some guys who were 3/4 of the way there. That just took a couple of different tweaks. Did you find your messaging changing across these maybe 3 different groups in terms of how you were able to sell it? Were there different things that you would lean on for one group over another group? Just kind of, I'd love to kind of chew on that these different persuasion
Absolutely.
paths, because to your point, just like you can't take something off the shelf and just implement it into your business, you can't take an idea and just implement it into the hearts and minds of the people. You have to convince them. It has to be kind of individualized. So let's dive into that.
Yeah, and beyond just, where they're at different stages, we're also talking about different regions. These 5 companies are all regional companies. So, one's based up in New England, one's based in Long Island, one's based in North Jersey, one's down in Florida, one's out in Arizona. So they all have different regional issues that they're dealing with as well. And that was something that took some effort to learn as well. So, with some of these compliance issues, our client is a government agency. In Florida, their government, requirements are much less than maybe they are up in Massachusetts.
Okay.
Right. So we had to deal with that as well. And, we had to be more focused on this area in this company than we are with this company. And that really, while we're using the same skeleton, we're putting meat on in different areas or muscle on in different areas of the body. And so that was a lot of different customizing and conversations. We are using a centralized framework, but your issues here are different from your issues up here, and we need to approach them differently. And so, a lot of those conversations, and that's where, getting the buy-in and showing value at each one kind of became a thing, because I had, I was traveling out, sitting with their leadership teams, explaining what the goal was. And then, in some ways we got grounded by COVID. So then it all became like this. And I found that a lot harder to get the buy-in, but we had to get there. After COVID, and I'm back out there, you see the fruits of your labor. I'm seeing, that it got done, even though we had to do it behind a screen for a while. They still understood what we were selling and put it in place. And so that's a little rewarding, I would say, for me, to see that you get the buy-in.
Well, I mean, you picked all these different locks. You know what I'm saying? It's not, it's not like you were kicking the door down. You picked those locks and you persuaded those people. And now you've operationalized this thing that has actually de-risked your organization in what sounds like a really meaningful way. Yeah.
And, it's still a learning curve. We've had to put in other policies, and, what worked in one area wasn't working in another. And the policy that we had put out, which was across the country policy, we really had to listen. And we had one of our companies that was really pushing back because we were hurting the way they had to do certain things. And, this is the hardest part, I think, Nick, is, we had put this out there. We had gotten feedback before we posted it, and I got it out there, and I thought it was that it hit every area and hit it right. And then to find out that it wasn't working, you have to eat a little humble pie there, right?
Yeah.
You designed it a certain way, thinking that you had the best solution. And then you find out that it's really not working well in one area. And you have to go back, and you have to be open to going back instead of forcing them. No, you have to do it this way. You have to be open to listen. And how do we make this work for you? And that was something, it's a little humbling sometimes,
For sure. Well, especially when you put so much of your heart into it and you put so much thought into it, and, you get those kind of early indications that like it's working. You're like, oh, not too bad. I'm not too bad here. And then you see, okay, this is more of a process. I didn't account for that. But again, if we can get back to that mentality of like, we are on a compliance journey. We're trying to climb this mountain of de-risking our organization and building a culture of integrity. It's never going to be perfect, right? It's going to be perfection is noble to pursue, even though it's never going to be achieved, right? That's just the mode that we need to be in. And I think when we're in that kind of a mode, we of course want to put our best foot forward and put our heart into our work and do our best. But there's always going to be something that we didn't account for, or some kind of exogenous variable that wasn't in play, or part of our multivariate equation that went into the construction of whatever thing we're talking about, that, we're just going to keep kind of putting one foot in front of the other and keep moving forward, But that humble pie thing, I think that's natural. And that comes only from people that really put a lot of their heart into their job and are really trying to, have a high standard for quality or something,
Yeah, I mean, I own it, right? I own what
It's
I'm
your
putting out
thing.
there.
You've signed your name on it. Yeah.
Right. So to to find out something you thought you built right isn't perfect, it's hard. It's hard, but you have to be open. You have to be open to getting the feedback from your operations team.
That's right.
Because otherwise, you're viewed as this guy in the tower, that's just commanding things from on high, instead of working with the people that actually do the work, right? That are
Right.
down there in the trenches, and getting that feedback is important. And I think being open to that feedback is really important. And that's something I really think is a big takeaway.
Yeah. Your company's not in business. They're not in the compliance business. They're in whatever business they're in, and they need to do that in a compliant way. And I get this whole debate about independence, and we need independence if we're going to be able to put the pressure and put the control in the business that's necessary. But that independence can't, to your point, push us out to be like apart from the business. We're not independent of the bit. We're still wearing the same jersey. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And so when we can wear both of those things and still be a part of the business, but maintain our independence so that we can put the right controls in place, that's really the ideal we want to, go for. And back to this thing about like, you should, or, commanding on high, like half of the people are going to do what they're told because they're conscientious people. Half the people in the world, you know what I'm saying? Conscientious people are going to, if they say they're going to do something, they do it. There's half of the population that aren't going to do it. They don't care. They're only going to do it if they want to do it, or it makes sense to them to do it, or they can see how that fits into their broader goal. And so while we're highly conscientious people that are a little bit more wired that way, to your point, we have to open our mind up to the diversity of personality type, if nothing else, within our organization, if we're going to be effective across these different ends of the sort of personality spectrum. If we're just talking to ourselves, well, guess what? You got 20 people in your organization that are going to do exactly what they're supposed to do, and everyone else is going to be kind of doing some semblance of it because they weren't listening, because they don't actually care, they have their own goals, they're not engaged, 1,000 other reasons. That's why that individual empathy and that trust building on a divisional basis or on a individual middle manager basis can really unlock so much more influence in the organization.
Yeah, and also to that point, how you present it, right?
Correct.
To get that buy-in, you don't want to write in legalese. Going back to your point from the beginning, right? Is, legal and compliance are separate animals. You've got compliance as part of, how the business is run.
Right.
Not so you don't write things. I don't want to cut and paste, regulations into my policies. I need to simplify them and make them digestible for everybody in the company. And I find a lot of people make that mistake. And I think that's a big one.
Well, and I think it's a very weak mentality, to be honest with you. It's a weak mentality because you're outsourcing your role again to some degree. Like, mastery in any field comes down to knowing what matters and what doesn't matter. And if you ask an undergraduate, physics student to describe physics, their explanation is going to be very complex. If you ask a postgraduate degree physics person to describe it, they're going to be able to describe it to a fifth grader because they know what matters, they know what doesn't matter. And if we're just copying and pasting a pronouncement or whatever and sending that off without even thinking about how is this going to be received? Is someone going to be able to digest this? Is this usable for the people that I'm serving? Well, then you're not adding any value at all. Our job is to be kind of be a translator, right? We need to translate all these regulations and all these risks and all these pronouncements through our mind to put it in the context of our business so that we can rule out the things that don't apply. We can double down on the things that actually do apply, and we can communicate it in a way not only that people understand, but that resonates with them and that answers that question of what's in it for me. That's what the key of persuasion is. When they voluntarily engage, that's how you have a self-sustaining program. If it's just because there's a new, the sort of Damocles hanging over their neck because you've been pounding on the table to do X, Y, and Z, that's not sustainable. That has a very short half-life, that kind of energy,
Yeah, absolutely. I see we got some questions in here. Let's try and bang these out real quick. Yeah. All right. So first question is, do you do focus groups or have division department representatives on a policy committee who review proposed new
Great question.
changes? Yeah, this is great. So the way that we typically handle it is we draft it. Part of the review group that I have are from several different areas. We have legal, we have HR, we have information technology, who happens to be also an engineer, so has the engineer mindset as well. And then
Smart.
I also have individuals that are in certain roles where this may play into it that I have review it as well. So I kind of have like my standing go-tos to get a review. And so it's not a standing committee as much as, okay, this is going to affect this group. Let me ask, I have a really good relationship with this estimator at this company. Let me have them review it for the effect on estimating, or this person in procurement, I need their take on this. So that's kind of the way that we do it in the design phase. Prior to finalizing anything, it is sent out to all of my company presidents for them to review and provide feedback in a Word document. They can put in notes, they can make suggestions, and that's what we do for, I like to think of it as more like quality control, right? Like, these are the people that understand the business better than I do, because let's face it, I'm not building bridges. They're out there, they know what they need. So they take a look at it to make sure how it's going to affect them.
And what that also does, John, is, I mean, when we roll out new policies in our organization, I do try to do this a similar type of a thing. I at least want some leader from the different groups to like weigh in on it before it's rolled out, because people inevitably are going to be like, who put this out? And if a leader on that team says, well, I reviewed it and we made these changes, then people don't feel like it's kind of like cast on them, but that they kind of, by 1 degree removed, like had some say in it or something. You know, again, it's all about that buy-in.
Right. And also to that point, I mean, you know, I'm not the right person to be setting estimating rules. I need somebody, right? Like I don't do that. That's not my area. So I need to be able to say, no, estimators from this all reviewed it to give feedback. Now, did we hit everything? No. Maybe we missed.
But again, that's fine. We have room for that because this is a process. This is not an etched in stones type scenario. Something else from Wendy. Hey, Wendy, listen to this. It's always interesting to me how so many speakers, particularly at conferences, lecture on what companies need to or should be doing. But when asked how to do those things, requesting practical, actionable steps, they're frequently stumped. I try to keep this in mind when working to gain buy-in and sell a new policy, program, protocol, whatever. Don't tell me what needs to happen. Help me understand how this will work and what's in it for me. Yeah. Round of applause for Wendy. Always coming with some kind of a pearl, some kind of wisdom coming from her.
Yeah,
I think that's so true,
Wendy. Yeah, absolutely. It's the why. If you can't explain to them why we need to make this change or why we need to implement this control, then you're already failing them, because they need to be able to ask you, why do we have to make this change? You know, what's the impetus for this? And it can't be just because, well, the company wants it done, right? You need to be able to explain to them, here's the real world risk. Here's the control that we're trying to implement to cut off that risk, to protect our employees, our company, and make sure that we all have jobs tomorrow, right? That's the ultimate goal. Right. We all want to keep working. So
we want to keep.
You got to be able to.
We want to keep working. We want to make more money. We want to get more security. All those things. Yeah. John, round of applause for John. I hope you guys enjoyed this. You know, we take very seriously the hour that we all get together every week. We really want to add a lot of value. We want this to be a little breath of fresh air, you know, because many times we start to feel crazy working by ourselves in our corners of the world. And when we can get together and share ideas like we do in the chat and just sharpen each other's saw, there's a lot of magic that can come from that. And I hope you found some value in it. Round of applause. Thank you, John, so much. We, you know, you didn't just tell us a concept, you talked about how you actually did it. And I think this case study is a perfect picture on how someone can elevate from compliance officer, or even, you know, elevate from the shoes that they stepped into for somebody that was maybe a little bit more compliance 1.0 or 2.0, and really kind of exhibit that compliance executive mentality to mitigate the risks that are most important and figure out a way to say yes for the business processes that actually support the business and actually create the value. So join us next week. we are going to be going into the benchmark report. Anybody in healthcare, go ahead and drop a 1 in the chat in our healthcare benchmark report. The only one in the industry just came out. So if you haven't seen that, drop a 1 in the chat and we will go ahead and send it. John, thank you so much, man. This was so fun. Always learn so much anytime I talk to you, man. You are one of the masters.
I appreciate that. And anytime. Thanks.
All right. We'll see you all next week. Take care.